Today, once again, we are going balls deep into Fantasy Basketball International's ADP data. This is bdub filling in for Adam solo today. Hopefully we can get through a few rounds. Let's play.
I could bet all of the riches that I ever had.
Righto, welcome to the show, everybody. As I said at the start of the episode, this is bdub filling in for Adam and going solo. It feels like I am going from new experience to new experience, hosting a show last week with Doc and now hosting one solo. So we'll see how this goes. Advanced apologies if it's a little bit jarring my first time. I'm sure you guys will cut me some slack. So we're going to pick up where we left off last time, and that was at round 5. So Doc and I covered the first 4 rounds of FBI ADP data. And something to note is that this ADP data was generated on the 29th of September, so around a week ago. So it's a little bit outdated. Some of these player ADPs have been coming in or blowing out, depending on which player we're talking about. And certainly with the World Cup drafting at the moment, it's been very interesting to see where players have been going in that tournament versus where they were going for, the weeks and months preceding. So kicking off with round 4, there was a couple of names here that jumped out at me specifically. Doc mentioned one last week, and that was Zion Williamson. So I think a lot of this may go without saying, but I'll quickly mention it anyway. Zion, we know, is an offensive weapon, the likes of which the NBA has only seen a few times in its history. His problem is that he just can't stay healthy. So if Zion was considered to be healthy and a sure bet to play, 70 games, he would definitely be going a lot higher than his current ADP, which is 49. But as we know, that's just simply not the case with him. So listening to a recent show with Nate Duncan and Danny LaRue, they were discussing the virtues of Zion Williamson. And, they gave some interesting statistics about how impactful he is when he's on the court, and specifically around how effective he is finishing around the rim. There's really been no other player quite like it, maybe all the way as far back as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So at 49, I think Zion is a fantastic pick. There's lots of upside there. If he does put it all together, he could be delivering you close to 30 points a game, plus with rebounds, assists, and massive field goal percentage to boot. You just need to be in a position where you can either absorb his free throw percentage or be punting it. So at 49, he's a great value pick. And I would certainly consider him in a lot of situations, and particularly if he falls further than 49, which is actually the case in a lot of leagues, because that average draft position of 49 actually reflects picks that were made before that mark as well as after. So another name that jumps off the page at me here is Josh Giddey. So he's currently going at 57. And I may as well tie this in with his teammate, Jalen Williams, who's going at 59. So where I think Josh Giddey is potentially going a little bit too high, I think Jalen Williams is going a little bit too low. So Giddey made massive steps last season. He improved his three-point percentage, which means he's going to be able to stay on the court a lot longer. He busted out multiple triple-double games, and he gets you a sort of all-important rebound statistic at sort of that guard slot, even though I do think he is listed as a power forward as well as a point guard on Fantrax, where FBI does most of their leagues. The issue is with Giddey that there's a lot of turnovers, and his overall shooting percentages, including his free throw percentages, aren't quite where we'd like to see them. Does he take a leap forward this season and continue his improvement from last season, which was actually one of the bigger improvements across the league? Or does he sort of keep more of the same, sort of plateauing on those percentages and potentially losing some usage with the addition of Chet Holmgren and on an OKC team that is looking to push into the playoffs. I know that Basketball Monster has him ranked somewhere in the 80s, and where I saw him going at around this position, 57, or in a lot of cases a lot earlier, in the recent World Cup drafts, he seems to be slipping. And in the division that I'm in, I believe it wasn't until the late 60s that he went. On the flip side, we've got Jalen Williams, who's ranked in this ADP data at 59. He is a little bit lower than that on Basketball Monster, and he has been also sliding in drafts. I've routinely seen him going in the 60s, and I believe I took him in the 60s. Actually, it was in the 60s in the World Cup draft that we're doing at the moment. There seems to be a lot of speculation that all those things I said about Giddey just before, the addition of Chet Holmgren, the fact that they're going to be trying to push into a playoff position, etc., we'll sort of see the Bronco, Jalen Williams role be sort of muted versus where it was to end up the season last year. But I just don't think that's the case at all. I think that he had a remarkable rookie performance, finishing in the top 3 of Rookie of the Year voting. And I just don't see any reason why that's not going to continue into this season. He's a low usage guy by nature, so he doesn't necessarily need the ball to be impactful. And I think the biggest fear is that his high steal rate, which was incredible to close out last season, drops back a bit, which would take him back from that sort of top 30 player he was over the last 8 weeks of last season to something more in the realm of the 60 to 80 mark. So just a personal preference here, but I think that we're going to see more of the same out of Jalen Williams. And I actually think that there's considerable capacity for him to take a further step up versus where he was last season, with the whole off season to develop his body, keep working on his skills and his shooting. I certainly think that Jalen Williams is poised for a big season. So we're cracking on quite a bit faster here without any banter with Doc, without anyone to throw these opinions off. So I'll just get cracking and jump into the next round, which is round 6. So in round 6, a couple of names that are standing out pretty well. I'm going to go with 3 names in this range here, just because I think they each have interesting commentary to be made about them. So the first one is Brook Lopez. So Brook Lopez, current ADP is 64. I'm going to say that I feel this is a bit high. So Brook actually smashed this last season. He was, in totals, he was, I believe, a second round guy. He was considerably higher than this, even in his per game values. But he's 35, I believe, maybe even pushing 36, which is quite old, and just particularly old for sort of a big man as well. These type of players tend to have a precipitous drop off at around this stage of their career, or in a lot of cases much earlier. I believe that Giannis wasn't 100% for a lot of the season last season. His knee was bothering him. He did take a lot of rest games. And Brook really needed to step up and sort of increase his defensive impact to make up for that. On the flip side of that, on the offensive end, the Bucks were without Chris Middleton for a lot of last season, which meant that Brook needed to step up on that offensive end of the floor. So with an off season under each of their belts, Giannis and Chris both seem to be in a better physical shape, which means that the requirement for Brook to step in and help both on the offensive and defensive end is going to diminish somewhat. But of course, the big elephant in the room is the addition of Damian Lillard, who is going to take a lot of the offensive load, a lot of which I think is going to come off Brook. So at 35 going on 36, and with a team of more healthy and more offensive-minded players, I think that Giannis is going to be able to help more on the defensive end, and Dame is going to help a lot more on the offensive end, and that's going to minimize what Brook can do. So I'm certainly not looking to draft him at 64 as his ADP would suggest that you should take him. So the next player off the rank is DeAndre Ayton. So I've got him at pick 65. Now, this ADP data was obviously generated prior to the trade with the Suns, the Blazers, and the Bucks, which saw DeAndre Ayton heading to the Trailblazers, where he is going to have a much greater offensive role on the team. So I think that everyone would be in agreement that taking DeAndre out of a situation where, one, he was unhappy at the Suns, and two, where there's three, ball-dominant playmakers in KD, Beal, and Booker, and then putting him onto a sort of a younger, up-and-coming, developing Portland team, he's going to get more run. He's going to potentially get a fraction more minutes than he was seeing he would have seen on the Suns. But most importantly, he's going to be much more involved, you would think, in the offense. So if that's the case, we could see Ayton's points totals pushing up. They really don't have a lot of rebounding on this team. They've basically got no forwards outside of Jeremy Grant, who's not a strong rebounder. And they don't really have a lot of depth at the center position. So DeAndre, I believe, will be expected to be hunting down those boards, and I think we can see those moving up. And similarly, I think that his shooting percentages, both free throw and field goal, should remain relatively consistent. And given he will have a bigger remit on the defensive end, we could see those blocks and even steals to a certain degree pushing up. So DeAndre is now going pretty squarely in the fourth round based off the World Cup draft results that I've seen. And with that in mind, 65 ADP is way too low. So the last guy in this sixth round, I should say, that we're going to have a really brief mention of is Ja Morant. So at 67, it's probably about the right place to take him. He's obviously suspended for the first, I believe it's 25 games of the season. And for my calculations, that brings you through somewhere into, that mid-December range. In fact, I think he gets back on the game either before or on Christmas Day. So taking Ja is a bit of a risk for a few reasons. Number one, our seasons, we try and end the season kind of mid to late March, allowing, maybe a 3-week buffer at the end so that we're not playing in the silly season where people are resting or, let's be more charitable, teams are sort of trotting out their young guys to get a better look at them. So that means that the season is a bit shorter than it otherwise might be. And we also have a 2-week championship matchup. You've got the 2-week All-Star break, and there's 3 rounds of finals. So they really are kicking off, in that February zone, early February. So if Ja's coming back Christmas Day and then the playoffs are starting early February, it's around 6 weeks of matchups or so, 6 or 7 weeks of matchups that you're likely to have Ja available for when he's already missed 7. So you basically get half a regular season out of him and then into playoffs. So in competitive leagues, and this might not apply to your home league or a less competitive league where you can basically ride out those first 7 weeks of the season, get a few wins on the board. Maybe you lose a couple. Maybe there's a draw in there, and it doesn't really matter. You get Ja come back in, you recover, you make the playoffs, and it's a good move. Specifically in the FBI leagues where it's a bit more competitive, if you're taking, in the 6th round, someone like Ja Morant, and he's giving you donuts for the first half of the season, can be quite difficult to remain competitive with the rest of the league. And if your win-loss record is such at Christmas time that you're sitting maybe second bottom of the ladder, even when Jar comes back and you start firing on all cylinders, it might but not be enough to sneak you into that 8th spot so that you can make playoffs. And then even if you do get into the 8th spot, you get matched up against the top team. So it is a bit risky to take Jar, I think, when you're playing in a competitive league. The other thing, of course, is, all right, he comes back, Christmas Day. He's training with the team. He's traveling with them. He's not attending the games, but he is presumably staying in shape and so on. But is there going to be some rust to shake off? Is he going to be eased back into it? Is he going to be sitting back to backs? Is he going to be playing lower minutes? I think all of those things are possible. So when you account for you've already missed half of the regular season, then you might have a 1, 2, 3 week sort of lead-in time with him getting back up to full duties. I think that just underscores why you should be cautious about taking Jar so early. Of course, if he slips a round or two, grab him, stash him, put him in the IR, and off to the races. Moving in to the next round here, which is round 7. A couple of names that are jumping off the page at me here are, all right, let's go with Mark Williams. So Mark Williams' ADP is 78. His ADP a couple of months ago was more like 98. So he's already come up sort of 20 spots in the ranks over the past 6 weeks or so. And I think that was largely fueled, of course, by people coming back and participating in drafts and a sort of a broader number of people drafting. So the consensus is kind of pushing him up for that reason, perhaps. But I think a lot of the rationale regarding his meteoric rise is the likes of Basketball Monster, where he has been projected very, very high. So particularly if you've got turnovers turned on, Mark's kind of coming in that 5th round as a really high potential target for people to take. So some people are taking him in that 50 to 60 zone, which I think is a little foolhardy. That's the Mark Williams that we all hope to see. I guess some of us expect to see this season, but we haven't really seen him put it together for an extended period yet. And, we think that he's going to be the starting center. I'm pretty confident that he will be. But is he going to get minutes in the 30s, mid-30s? Or is he going to be more in a minute split with some of the other centers on that team, maybe a Nick Richards or something along those lines? So there's that factor. Does he split minutes with the other centers on the team? Another factor would be have we seen him staying out of foul trouble consistently and then producing over a long period of time? The answer to that is also no. So we haven't necessarily seen him do it yet, is my point. And while he might sort of finish a top 50, top 60 guy, you're sort of taking away a lot of the upside if you're taking him in that range. So at 78, there is still some upside there, but I think also a reasonable amount of downside too. As I said, in the World Cup, he's certainly been going higher than 78, not necessarily escaping that 6th round in most of the leagues I've seen. So at 78, I don't think Mark's going to end up on a lot of my teams, and he hasn't for the last few weeks or so. Now I think there's another couple of centers around this range that I think I would maybe take it at a wing in this area and then wait around to get a center. But Mark Williams is certainly an interesting character, interesting prospect that may have a big season. One last thing on Mark Williams is Adam King recently sort of did an exercise with a lot of the analysts that we're in pretty tight-knit communications with. We all put forward 3 players that we thought would pop this season. So sort of like a marker. And Adam's going to review it mid-season and come back and review it after the season. So watch out for that tweet. I don't think it's out yet, but I think that's going to be very interesting to sort of see how those players that are nominated perform over the course of the season. And one thing I will say is that Mark Williams was featured on a number of those analyst lists. So people are certainly pricing in a much better season for Mark than they have or they did in his rookie season, which is understandable. Another name in this round that jumps off the page at me is Jalen Green at 84. So I have been taking Jalen Green in quite a number of leagues, mostly in the 90s, maybe the early 100s is around the time that I have been taking him. But I have obviously seen him going earlier, and with an ADP, rank of 84, ADP of 85.83, that obviously means that he has been getting grabbed earlier by a lot of people. I think I was guilty of this too last season. Coming into last season, people were a bit hot on Jalen Green. They expected him to take a bigger leap forward than he did in the end take last season, and he was getting taken kind of in the 6th round. So, the 7th round here is quite a lot more reasonable for Jalen than in that 6th round period. But I don't think it's where I would feel comfortable taking him. Maybe around 2 rounds, even 3 rounds later, yes. But in this 7th round, the reason that I wouldn't look at taking him so much is because while he does deliver really healthy amount of points, roughly 24 points a game, the rest of his statistics are pretty hollow. So not much in the way of defensive stats. It's not elite at 3-pointers. You're not getting a lot of boards out of him. And then his field goal percentage is obviously not what you would like with any player. And, unless you are punting field goal percentage, he's not really going to deliver you that value unless he takes a considerable leap up. And I'm just not sure he's going to do that this season in the way that we would like to see in Houston. And that's mostly because, it's a very crowded team in the sense that there are a lot of young prospects there. They're going to want to get the ball into the hands of others. Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks have both joined the team, as well as a couple of other vets like Jeff Green. So there's probably just going to be less usage to go around. And while Jalen might actually give you a healthy point scoring outlook, just not sure that he gets the bandwidth to be able to develop in those other areas. So it's going to be interesting to see how this season plays out with Jalen. Could be completely wrong. He could really take another step up with Ime Udoka there and a bit of a more disciplined regime in place. Maybe he thrives in that situation. But yeah, at 84, not for me. Give him to me at 104 though. I'll take him. I'll take him there, no problems, and get that scoring boost. And just for reference, another player that's going just 4 spots ahead of him, who I'd much rather have, is Anthony Simons, who's got an ADP there, or an ADP rank of 80. I've seen him going in the 60s pretty consistently in the World Cup. So there's another bloke who's just absolutely shooting up draft boards. Right, moving into round 8, and I'm absolutely flying through these. I could get through the whole 14 rounds by the end of this pod. Getting into round 8. All right, a couple of interesting names here. We've got Scoot Henderson, Trey Murphy, and I'll throw in one more here, which is an interesting one. Let's go with Jabari Smith. So Scoot ADP rank is 90. His actual ADP value is 87.71, but it's 90th overall. Trey is at 91 and Jabari's at 92. So all in a row, 90, 91, 92. So Scoot has actually been, he's pretty consistently been going around this area. People, even before the Dame trade, were pretty convinced that Dame wouldn't be around in Portland, and sort of rightly, in my view, surmised that Scoot would get a fair bit of run over in Portland. He'd be the dominant playmaker alongside Anthony Simons, and that we could expect a lot of, at the very least, assists from him, if not points and threes as well. His 3-point shot looked pretty good in Summer League. So around 90 was where he was going. But I will report from the World Cup that he has definitely been dropping across those World Cup divisions in those drafts. I believe that in my league, he almost got back to me in the 11th round. So I was drafting at pick 8 in the 11th round. So something in the, so that was the 10th round actually. So I know it was the 11th round. Yeah. So he got taken about round 11, pick 1. So it's around 121, I believe. So very, very late versus where he was going in this ADP data. Reason for that, again, it's the Basketball Monster stats that have come out where he has been projected for very, very low field goal percentage, sort of subpar free throw percentage, and not the type of points scoring that many of us thought he might be capable of in year 1. So I believe they've got him in the mid-teens for points, very inefficient. And they're sort of factoring in that, there's going to be an adjustment period. And as a teenager coming into the NBA, it is going to take him some time to realize his full potential, which I totally get. So I didn't get Scoot a ton. Again, there were different guards that I preferred in this area, like an Austin Reeves. And there was some uncertainty about, what was going to happen with Dame or other point guards would be coming back. Even though I'm pretty sure that wouldn't be the case, that other point guards wouldn't be coming back. The purpose of trading Dame was to get Scoot his own sort of airtime on the court. But yeah, long story short, once he's getting into those hundreds, if you need assists, I'd be prepared to take a gamble on him there. I think both his percentages could be significantly better than what they're projected at. And I think his point scoring could be better too. So particularly now that he's sort of guaranteed to have the keys to the Cadillac over in Portland, I am relatively comfortable taking him in the 9th and 10th round in drafts, but not any earlier. Moving on to Trey Murphy III. Trey is he's a guy that obviously has been slipping dramatically down draft boards. He was going in the 6th round pretty consistently most of the offseason. There's a lot of hype around Trey on different NBA podcasts with, even though he did break out last season, well and truly broke out last season, a lot of analysts are sort of predicting a further breakout this season and sort of even projecting him as an all-star. He obviously hurt his meniscus and he's going to miss the start of the season. So I believe he's currently projected to come back around mid-November. I reckon on that Pelicans team, you probably find that they're slightly more cautious than that, and probably expect him back to sort of start December. He is going to miss that sort of first 5-6 weeks of the season. It's around the same amount of time as Jar's going to miss, maybe a little bit less. So with that in mind, it's all the same things I said about Jar before. With a truncated season where you've got maybe a 14 matchup regular season, Trey Murphy's going to miss maybe up to half of those matchups, and then he's going to need a period of ramping up to get back to sort of where he was to end last season. Also with Trey, a lot of that value does come from lack of turnovers. So for those of us who don't factor that in too much, I guess you need to factor that in as well. At 91, I think it's a reasonable, it's a much more reasonable in some ways than taking Jar in that mid-60s range, because you're not really leaving too much on the table to, take Trey in that area and then stash him. In the World Cup, he's certainly been falling down much further. I believe my draft is up to about 120 or so at the moment, and he's still on the board last time I checked, which totally makes sense because of the reasons that we said earlier. The World Cup playoffs begin on the 8th of Jan. So if he's getting back mid-December and he has a few weeks ramping up, you sort of going through that whole regular season without your 8th round pick. So interesting spot for Trey there at 91. I think in some situations could be good, but in others really detrimental. So moving on to Jabari, the last guy that we'll chat about in this round. His projections have him significantly lower than this. Sort of lackluster on the, he's like a slight positive with points and, a bit decent on threes, kind of in and around there on blocks. Lower free throw percentage than I guess you would expect for a shooter. And he obviously had I guess like a poor rookie campaign by a lot of measurements. So Jabari at 92, I do think that there is significant upside with that scope for dramatic improvement. We sort of saw it in Summer League to a certain degree, and it was almost like a microcosm of maybe his first year 1 and year 2, where the first game in Summer League, he stunk it up. Or actually, it wasn't the whole first game. I think it was like just the first half. And then he sort of came out all guns blazing in the next half, and then proceeded to have like multiple 30-point games before they pulled him from Summer League. So he seems to be in form. He's a big guy. He can conceivably play at center. I know that they've got Alperen Sengun on that team, which we'd all like to see get like 35 minutes. But Udoka could realistically start running Smith at center quite frequently. That would be at the expense of Sengun, but it would mean that, that Jabari is getting more time on the floor and probably more usage as well if he's going to be playing as a center in that starting 5. So at 92, I sort of think that's his floor, and that is going against, I guess, what he's projected out at. I just think that as a shooter and like looking at his tape in college, he's got to be a better free throw shooter than projected. I just can't see how such a strong shooter could be not more elite at the line. So I think he's going to bump that up. I think he's going to be shooting more and have the ball in his hands, be more of the focal point in the offense, alongside the other, the Jalen Greens and Fred VanVleets of the world. Hopefully Brooksy's not going to rob him of that opportunity. But I really think that with a full off season with the team and a better coach and more discipline and the recent form that he's been showing, that he could just be shooting at a higher rate, could get more of the ball, which would mean his points would go up, his threes would go up, and his overall fantasy impact would go up as well. So I do like that there for Jabari, and I have taken him earlier than 92 on multiple occasions. Right. Moving into the next round, which is the 9th round. A couple of interesting names that jump off the page at me here. Let's go with Trey Jones, whose rank is 108, ADP also 108. Trey Jones is actually not a player that I've had a lot of interest in previous years. Even last year when he was sort of projected to get that starting role in San Antonio at point guard, which ultimately he did get. I wasn't that enamored with his play, just like the eye test, watching him on that Spurs team. And I didn't really think that he would live up to the hype at all. So he sort of proved me wrong and proved me right last year. He definitely played a lot of minutes, and his assists were really fantastic. I mean, for someone you're getting at the back end of the 9th round to get the 7, 8, 9 assists a game, and obviously he was getting more than that on some occasions. That's really good to pick up so late in your drafts. And he's also been quite good at steals as well, I should say. And he wasn't quite as elite as people thought he was going to be, but still a very healthy amount of steals per game. The problem is that, the point scoring didn't really come along with it. So where you would have liked to see him pushing up into the high teens, 16, 17, 18 points a game, didn't quite get there. He sort of stuck it around that, a dozen or so points a game. But at 108, for the reasons I mentioned before, really good assists and very healthy steals. in a lot of builds, that's really, really strong to get that at that point in the draft. And of course, as we know, assists tend to dry up pretty precipitously. And just the ability to get him there is a really good option. And in the World Cup, I've got a punt blocks build. Really, really wanted him in this ninth round. I was sort of forced into taking a center or a big man, I should say, beforehand, because I hadn't taken many in the first few rounds. Went with John Collins in the previous round. I really wanted to get Trey in this next round and got sniped the pick before me. So it goes. All right. So that's the first guy from that ninth round. Another guy that we've got there is Jalen Duren. So he's actually like a full 10 spots ahead of Trey in terms of his rank. So he's coming at 98. The ADP is also 98.32. So bang on. For me, this is a bit early. Jalen Duren hype train is real. A lot of people sort of see his freak athleticism. They look at his age, and they get quite excited about the potential for massive rebounds, multi-blocks per game, and view him as like a full-blown sleeper at this ADP. I'm not quite in that camp. I worry about the amount of minutes that he's going to get. I believe Josh Kyle have got him projected in that sort of 30 to 32 minutes a game. I think that could be a bit high. He obviously didn't get quite so high last season, although he did finish out the season playing sort of in that range of minutes. Just not sure that he even gets the starting position in Detroit, to be frank with you. Forgive me if on media day or in the last day or two, someone from Detroit's come out and said something different to that. But last I heard was it's still a bit up in the air. Now, I think as fantasy players, we see statistical potential in someone like Jalen Duren, and we think to ourselves that it's like so obvious that Jalen will go into the starting lineup because look at who else is around him. It's it's Isaiah Stewart, it's James Wiseman, it's Marvin Bagley, who have been have had much less statistical upside in the minutes that they've played over the previous years. But for that reason, we kind of talk ourselves into thinking that Jalen is a sure thing starter. I just don't think that's the case at all. And listening to some podcasts with Pistons experts, I'm talking about obviously Josh's podcast where he had a sort of a rundown in Detroit, although in that one they were a bit more bullish about Duren's role, but also the likes of Real GM Radio and Dunked On with Nate Duncan and Danny LaRue. The guests that they had on were a bit more pessimistic about Jalen's ability to be that starter from day one of this season, and frankly, at any time during the season. So a lot of speculation that it could be Isaiah Stewart starting at the 5 there, and that Jalen could come off the bench. So if any of those sort of, and just before I go on, it is worth noting that you've got Wiseman and Bagley who will be getting some minutes. Wiseman in a contract extension year. So, they will be getting a last look at him and deciding how they move forward or back. And Bagley obviously already been paid and on a contract. He will have some kind of role on this team. So with the competition at the big man slots and with a little bit more doubt than I think is consensus about where Jalen starts the season and his ability to lock up that starting role long term, I can just see a scenario where instead of 32 minutes, it's more like 26, 27. And, he's not going to return the type of value that people are expecting. And therefore, this position would be much too high for him. The other thing, of course, is we just don't know how Monty Williams is going to prioritize these players. We have no evidence to suggest that he's going to prioritize Jalen Duren whatsoever. All right, so moving into, where are we? This is the 10th round. A few names that jump off the list here. well, I couldn't really do this podcast without talking about one of my, I guess, pop picks for this season, who seems to be on almost all of my teams, although he was sniped the pick before me in the World Cup draft just not so long ago, like an hour or so ago, and that's Shaden Sharp. So Shaden here is both a rank and an ADP of 118. Shaden is quite plausibly going to be the starter on. It's probably going to be a starting small forward on the Portland Trailblazers. I'm sort of projecting that starting five to be Scoot, Anthony Simons, Shaden Sharp, Jeremy Grant, and DeAndre Ayton. So a couple of things on Shaden. One, he's going to be starting, and the Blazers have signaled that they plan to play him starters minutes, so he's going to be getting a lot of run. Second thing that's related to that is we actually saw Shaden getting a lot of run to end last season, where he did look very interesting as a starter, inefficient, did score quite a few points, surprising defensive stats. So I guess what I'm saying here is we've seen Shaden in a starting role, getting healthy minutes and producing, and he's projected to start this season, and he's going to get minutes. One thing I will say is that even though he is going to get minutes, most likely, and he's going to be a starter and all the rest of it, it is still a bit of a different situation to last season, in a sense that where he more or less had the keys and he was, facilitating the offense quite a bit in that sort of that stretch to end last season. He's not necessarily going to have that same role this season with Anthony Simons there, with Scoot there. They're probably going to take a lot of that ball handling and offense initiating responsibility. So just as to pour a little bit of cold water on my own hype before I get into it, is that, his role might not actually be exactly what it was to end last season. But what we did see to end last season was real sort of scoring potential. It wasn't potential. He actually realized that, and he did score a lot to end last season. We also saw him playing just above the rim, really going right at some of the best centers in the league. I think there was one highlight where just right at Triple J and, finished around the rim, with Triple J in his face. To me, that was really encouraging. I really think that he's got a good feel for the game. He basically missed his whole college season, so he sort of missed the development that comes with that as well. And last season, I think he progressed way faster than people were expecting. So if that sort of rate of improvement continues, he could really step into a bigger role than we're expecting. And either way, I still think that we're going to see high scoring out of him. I reckon 20 points a game is probably where I'd have him at. I wouldn't be surprised to see him have some games where he's scoring, in the high 20s. I think that he can. He might take some steps forward in his defense. He's already a healthy shot blocker for his position, and if he can add some steals onto that, he's already got pretty decent field goal percentage. So that really is a good mix for success, in my view. And I think free throw percentage is something that can be improved and often does improve in year two. So Shaden, I love at pick 118 there. Even though it technically is in the 10th round, and that's where I personally like to sort of focus more on sure things, I really do put him in that category. So the other guy that I'm going to talk about here is Ben Simmons. So he is going 9 slots higher than Shaden at 109. When we started draft only this season in July, he was going undrafted in some leagues. For me, was like a great 14th round pick. He's obviously come in, and I was taking him in round 13 and round 12 in some leagues. But now I think it's just gone way too far the other way. I believe in our World Cup division, he went around the 9th round. possibly in this 10th round. Actually, probably was around this spot where this ADP is, but I've seen him in other divisions going sort of 7th round, 8th round, or, I think one even in the late 6th. So he does have a sort of very enticing stat set with particularly his assists, rebounds, and steals, which is not a common combination. So if you're punting blocks or you're punting points, it's a fantastic, fantastic statistical profile for you to add to your team. As we see sort of with Ben Simmons at different times, we get these leaked videos or images of him working out or, making shots. I think I saw one yesterday where Ben Simmons hit 10 free throws in a row. He's turned the corner, that kind of commentary. I think that contributes to him getting overblown and moving up into that 7th or 8th, even 9th round where I think it's a bit too high. And I also think that those really strong Z scores on Basketball Monster in those 3 categories I mentioned before, rebounds, assists, and steals, has also got people really excited with him, because what those strong Z scores sort of translate to is like, as soon as you turn off turnovers, and particularly if you turn off, like a points or a blocks, punting them, he really does project, by the Basketball Monster guys to be, in 60s or 70s worth of value. So for me, I think with Simmons, we really have had a couple of seasons where he hasn't done much. His value has really declined around the league amongst GMs and so on. And he was actually minimized quite substantially in Brooklyn last season. I know he did have some injury issues, but I guess I would be more inclined to expect more of the same, even though I am hoping for a dramatic improvement. Like, he's an Aussie. He's actually from Melbourne, and he's actually went to school, 10, 15 Ks from here. So, it's a guy that I root for. I've got his jersey. But until I really see him put together a good stretch of the old Ben Simmons, I'm still quite skeptical about it. And for that reason, I find that, over the last month or 6 weeks or so, and including in this World Cup, I don't feel comfortable taking him, in that 8th or 9th round. I let it slide and then he's gone. So if you do want him, you realistically, I think you need to be, I think it's that 9th round that you need to be targeting him. All right, moving into the 11th round here. I'm going to probably burn through these last 4 rounds a bit faster. And I know that I've been burning through them already. But like this 11th round is possibly not as many interesting players to talk about. But in this 11th round, I'll talk about Keldon Johnson. His rank is 124. His average draft position is 121. I think Keldon is actually suffering from his ADP is suffering from people being very pessimistic about him. He didn't have a bad season last year. Yes, he's got a very sort of empty statistical profile, very, very points heavy, good in a points league, but in a categories league where his percentages aren't the best, they sort of drag him down a bit. And then the rest of what he does is very, very empty. He has been going very, very late, and 124 for Keldon. Yes, I think his variance is actually smaller than a lot of these other players. Like, you do see him going in the mid-teens, but then you also do see him falling down to 140, or so, which is pretty wild that he'd be falling into that 13th round. The main thing that Keldon's going to do for you is going to give you a points boost, which I think in round 11, where we're discussing right now, if you're needing if you're sort of lagging behind in points and it's a competitive category, which it typically is in a lot of leagues, then getting him in this 11th round is actually quite a worthy pick. Does he have potential for upside? I think the answer to that against consensus is that actually maybe yes, right? So for all the reasons that people are sort of down on Keldon, that he has an empty statistical profile, he only scores points, that's all he does, And now we've got Victor Wembanyama coming on the team, expecting Sohan to take a step up, and so on. And therefore, Keldon's points might go down. I think for those same reasons, his efficiency actually might go up. And then maybe there's an opportunity for him to focus on his defensive statistics a little bit more as well. So Keldon isn't getting the same usage as he was getting last year. I think that's probably accurate. He is going to have the ball in his hands less. He's going to be taking less shots. He's going to be scoring less points. But maybe that means that he does that scores those points more efficiently. And maybe that gives him or sort of refocuses his attention on what he can do on the defensive end. I know that's a big what if and probably won't happen. But if he can push up those steals and blocks a little bit, particularly the steals, and if he can become more efficient, particularly in that field goal area, he could return that value, but or even a better value, but just in a way that you're not necessarily expecting. The other guy that I'll talk about in this zone here is all reasonably vanilla, but we can go with two other point guards, or 2 point guards here. Russell Westbrook and Mike Conley going back to back in terms of their ADP, 125 and 126 respectively. I think they both suffer from somewhat of similar rationale for letting them drop. So getting older, on the decline, and can we expect them to deliver for a full season? I think that's their similarities. In Russell Westbrook's case, it's probably more around his percentages, including his free throw percentage isn't great. I guess a lack in trust in Westbrook, given sort of some of his trials and tribulations in LA. But I guess with Rusty, he's going to give you poor free throw percentage, and he takes a few of them too, which isn't ideal. But he is going to be the starting point guard on the Clippers. And at this stage, while we don't know what's going on with Harden, personally, I feel like he will be on the Clippers to start the NBA season. But Rusty, at this point, without Harden there, he's going to be the starter. And he is going to be treated like a starter by the other players. He's going to get the ball. He's going to contribute to the offense. And he's going to get assists. I think those things are for sure. So if you can eat his rubbish percentages, then I guess Russell's a fairly decent pick in that area, and could return slightly better value. And some other tidbit I heard about Russell Westbrook this morning was apparently he called a all player meeting in Las Vegas last week, and the whole team turned up. I think it was only Batum and one of the other, Marcus Morris and maybe one of the other older vets that didn't go. But what that says to me is that if Rusty is calling an all-player meeting in Vegas and these guys have to fly there and make a big effort to go there, he's basically taken on a leadership position on the Clippers. Paul George doesn't seem to be his cup of tea, that leadership stuff. And Kawhi also doesn't seem to be that sort of proactive leader either. And if Russell is taking on that responsibility, to me, it sort of says that he's really entrenching what I said at the start, which is like, I'm a starter. I'm an integral part of this team. And for that reason, I'd probably feel a bit more comfortable about taking him, because he does seem to be a sort of a key part of what this team is going to do going into this season. On the flip side, I mentioned it before, James Harden could come along. I think that really hurts Rusty. So I think keep your eyes on that. Probably wouldn't be taking Rusty at all if Jimmy Harden comes to the Clips, even though I do expect that Rusty would stay on the team in that scenario. All right. Moving into the next round, what are we up to now? This is round, I think that was round 11. This is round 12. Quite a number of interesting names in this section, actually, quite a number of them. So we've got Asor Thompson, Tari Eason, Paul Reed, Armin Thompson, Benedict Mathurin, Jeremy Sohan, Patrick Williams, all in this zone. So I'm not going to go through each one of those players, but I will talk about a couple of them. But I mentioned them all because actually you're getting into this 12th round, and there's quite a number of players that I like there, and I'd be perfectly happy taking them in that 11th round. So those names I mentioned before, given that they're all sort of bunched together, I'd be targeting those guys as early as the 11th round. But just to pick a couple out, let's go with Paul Reed. I spoke to Josh Lloyd about it on his podcast the other day. Joshy had him at about 108, which I said was too high. But at 136, I think that's absolutely fantastic value there for Reed. I passed on him with about pick 116, 117 in the FBI World Cup just now, but that was only because his statistical profile didn't really match what I was doing, and I'm sure that he's probably already off the board. But as I said, at 108, I think that's too high for Paul. People are really, he has been going off draft boards, and I don't think you're going to get him in the 12th round anymore. I think the 10th round is probably where he's actually going. But Nick Nurse came out and said that he reminds him of Pascal Siakam. There was a clip on Twitter going around that really sort of was an interview with Nick Nurse where he was pumping up his tires quite substantially. I think there is a possibility that he, gets gets more than just a backup. He gets more minutes than just backing up Embiid, which would be something like, that'd be maybe 12 to 18 minutes a game, just backing up Embiid. But I think what he could realistically do is start to eat into PJ Tucker's minutes and pick up some minutes at the power forward spot there as well. I think with this Harden trade, there's a realistic possibility that PJ Tucker goes out the door as well, which again would elevate Reed. And then, as we know, his statistical profile is fantastic, particularly blocks, steals, and boards. So he's going to get you those defensive stats, which are quite hard to come by. Particularly this, actually, they're not that hard to come by at this stage of the draft. Blocks are, but not steals. But that combo of boards, blocks, and steals and good field goal percentage is really good to pick up in the later rounds of draft. So if you are seeing him anywhere past in round 11 or later, great upside flyer to take. And certainly where his ADP is at 136, anything up to around there would be a fantastic score, in my opinion. But yeah, the 10th round is probably a bit rich for my blood personally. All right. Next guy here is Armin. Let's go with the Thompson brothers, right? So we've got Asor at 134, and then Armin at 137. The amount of leagues where they go back to back is just insane. It's like everyone's eyeing off the Thompson twins, and then as soon as one goes, the next one goes in the next pick or two, almost hands down. But anyway, Asor 3 spots higher than Armin. I think the commentary on these two guys. One, Asor, he's more of a sort of the playmaking twin. And the idea is, or the thought process is, that he's going to be able to fit onto an NBA team off the bat better than Armin, who's sort of more of a score first option would. And that he's going to pick up for that reason, and also just Detroit's roster construction, that he's probably going to be in a position to contribute more and sooner on that team. Whereas with his brother, I guess the consensus is that, that team's a bit more crowded. It's going to take him longer to ease into it. He's not going to get handed the keys and be the first offensive or even the second offensive option, either the third or the fourth offensive option for some time. And the sort of consensus there is that, Asor's probably the better pick for this season, whereas Armin's a better long-term prospect. Sort of agree with that to a certain degree. Of course, with Armin being on Houston and KPJ unlikely to play this season, his prospects have been looking brighter this season. I have seen Armin start to go ahead of Asor in some situations. But I think both these guys are equally good in terms of being flyers at this stage in the draft. I actually have them both as really high-grade prospects. I think Amen is considered to be a better prospect than Osor, but as identical twins, I don't necessarily make that distinction. I think Osor probably can do a lot of that stuff that Amen has been seen to do. He's just been filling a different role over the last couple of years, so we haven't seen it. They both seem to have amazing attitudes and studying other players and really invested in their careers. And other reports are, from people that have worked with them and coached them and been their teammates, that they're just absolutely dedicated individuals. So I think they both have the ability to pop this season. And I think they're both worthy flyers. But personally, I'd go for Osor in most situations, just because of his probably going to get more minutes, but also because he's projected to have a much higher steal rate than Amen. And picking up a guy that's going to give you some assists, going to give you some points, and going to give you a really strong showing in steals, I just think that's really valuable in this part of the draft. And honestly, I'm hoping to get him in the next round of the FBI World Cup. Got my fingers crossed that he falls to me. So as I'm pushed to the hour mark here, there's realistically 2 rounds to go. So given that we've come this far, I'm just going to finish this off and get to it. So round 13, the player here that I'm going to quickly talk about is Dennis Schroeder. I think this is too low for him personally. He is going to be the starting point guard on the Toronto Raptors. He's coming off a fantastic World Cup. He was the MVP. His team won the World Cup. And he played really well there. And I think actually he played pretty reasonably in the playoffs a lot of the time. And something interesting about Dennis Schroeder is that his defense has really sort of come along over the last couple of seasons. I remember there where was he? He was on the Lakers. He declined that contract. He went somewhere else. Where was it? Might have been Houston, actually. And his value was really sort of in the gutter. He was at that point in time ball dominant point guard, sort of wanted to be one of the main options on offense, but he's really added that defensive component to his game, which I think, again, is going to give him more minutes. And the fact that he's a starting point guard in Toronto, that's going to ensure him a certain level of minutes as well. Replacing Fred VanVleet, who was I think it's a key part of the Toronto offense. I don't think teams can actually change scheme as quickly as we like to think. I'm not sure that Scotty Barnes necessarily steps into as an active ball handler as much as a lot of people are projecting. So I think actually Dennis is going to get a fair bit of run and have the ball in his hands a fair bit of the time, and probably quite a lot in the second team as well. I don't think Malachi Flynn's really going to be prioritized. So I think Dennis is going to have more usage and more responsibility than we're anticipating. And for that, I think all of his projections are probably a bit under. I think he's going to get more points. He's going to get more assists than anticipated. And with his sort of new defensive focus, maybe the steals can come up a little bit more as well. And he's obviously a decent free throw shooter, and he's not too bad on the field goals either. So I think Dennis Schroeder is a pretty strong pick in that range, and I certainly will be taking him when I get him there. The other guy I will sort of mention in this round is Christian Wood. His ADP started off higher than this, 10th round, 9th round, and then really fell away over the offseason when he didn't get picked up by a team. And he was getting undrafted in a lot of leagues before he eventually signed that contract with the Lakers. Now he's sort of shooting back up the boards. Weirdly, in our World Cup division, I think he went in like the 9th round, which is way too high in my view. I mean, the manager could have waited at 2 rounds and still picked him up there, I reckon. But anyway, I think the thinking is with him that, he's probably the primary backup to AD. We sort of anticipate that AD is going to, miss time. So I think that's a bit erroneous to anticipate that guys are going to miss time. But in AD's case, there are going to be games off and so on. So he could be good in spurts on the Lakers, Christian Wood. But I don't think that at the minimum there, he's necessarily the fait accompli backup to AD that people expect him to be. I know Jackson Hayes isn't much chop, but he's also on the team. I do think that they are going to see what they have with him and see how he can play with the others. So I do think that'll eat into Christian's minutes a bit. And I just don't think he's going to be sort of treated the same as he was on Dallas, where he was the sixth man at times. I think he's going to be have a less prevalent role than he has had in previous seasons. So at this spot, 145, totally cool. He has upside from here, and he'd probably outperform this value, and definitely in some weeks he will. But where he's going in a lot of leagues, 10th round, even 9th round, I think that's too high. And people are, I think they're thinking that he's going to have a similar role to what he did on Dallas to start last season. And I just don't think that's going to be the case. Final round here, some interesting names. Final round here, some interesting names. All right, so who have we got? We've got in this zone, and sort of we're getting here to the point where the ADP data gets a little bit more spotty in the sense that, not every single player gets taken in every single draft. So I'll go here with Obi Toppin and Harrison Barnes. I'll end with someone that I'm gonna shitball here. So Obi Toppin, fantastic flyer here, I think. 157 is the rank, 149 is the ADP. The disparity gets a bit greater towards the end of the draft for the reason I mentioned earlier. Not every player goes in every round. But Obi's often going as like in the 10th round. I see that frequently. I think in the last few drafts I've seen him go round 11. So getting him in round 14, definitely that was plausible over the past few months, but he's definitely flown up draft boards. I think the idea here is that he'll be starting in Indiana, or if not starting, he'll have a much better role than he did in New York. I think even more importantly than that, the fit on Indiana, where sort of his rim running and ability to get out on the fast break is really going to be play to his strengths on this team. I think that's what people are getting sort of really hyped up on. I do think for those reasons, he's a good flyer in the last round, the second last round. But I think sort of locking him into that role, which is what you must be thinking if you're taking him in the 9th or 10th, or even the 11th round, I think that's a bit of a mistake. We know that front court is crowded. He's really going to be going head to head with Jarris Walker for those minutes. And while, he's probably going to start the season off getting the lion's share of those minutes, if Jarris, develops, reasonably quickly or quicker than that people are expecting, I think those minutes could get eaten away reasonably quickly. And also, the Pacers might find that they don't value Obi so highly, and for all the same reasons as they didn't in New York, that they've got better options, or that the style of play that you need to participate in to sort of get the most out of him, they're not really willing to sort of, reorientate the whole offense just around Obi. They've got other players to prioritize there. So, taking him so high, round 9, round 10, I think that's a mistake. But in these final rounds, totally good sort of flyer candidate. The last guy I was going to mention is very boring, Harrison Barnes. My point of view there is like, why bother? Like, no upside. Why would you waste a draft pick on a guy like that? Okay, he's going to get you some points and decent percentages, but round 14 is not the time to try and bolster your team statistically. It's the time to take upside flyers and hope that someone that you take is, producing a couple of rounds, 2-3 rounds better value than where you took him. And just Harrison Barnes is not going to do that. Contrast him to the guy going directly before. So, Harrison Barnes ranked 162. The guy before that is Quentin Grimes at 161. I think that's a much better option for your last pick in the draft. He isn't, I guess, projected to give you the same amount of points as Harrison's going to be, but he does have the potential to elevate versus what he was doing last season. So, he began starting with the Knicks towards the end of the season. I think he's probably locked in that role and that he's going to start for the Knicks. So he's going to be playing a decent amount of minutes. He can shoot. He's fantastic on the defensive end. So I think his role on New York's pretty secure. Harrison's is as well. But where with Harrison, I just don't see any potential for upside. With Quinton, I think, he could improve his scoring. He could shoot a few more threes than he has been per game. His defensive numbers could go up. Much prefer in that final round an upside flyer such as, your Quinton Grimes, and prefer that massively to like a dinosaur like Harrison Barnes. So that does it, guys. That brings us through 14 rounds. Went through 4 rounds in episode 1 and another 10 today, and in about the same amount of time. So interesting to contrast the duo versus solo approach to podcasting. I certainly enjoyed it, guys. So to sign off, please follow us on Twitter. It does help us out. Our handle is at FBI Basketball. You can follow me on Twitter. That's at Hidden Upside. And please, the most important thing to do is join our Discord. You can find the link to that in my Twitter bio, in the FBI Basketball Twitter bio, or at our website, fbibasketball.com. And I guess the last thing to mention is that our standard head-to-head and roto redraft leagues have launched. There's quite a few of them are completely full, but there's more than a dozen that are filling now in the server, with probably another dozen or so to be released in the coming week. So jump in the server, jump in those leagues. They're fantastic, great group of managers, very competitive and fun. But other than that, thanks for playing.
You just listened to another episode from the Fantasy Basketball International Podcast Network. Thanks for joining us. And for more information about joining our community, please check out our website at fbibasketball.com.